Hi guys, welcome to Psychology IB from Project 45. Today we're going to be going over the biological approach to psychology, more specifically looking at the techniques used to investigate the brain. Okay, first of all, let's start with PET. So this stands for positron emission tomography, which is basically, in a nutshell, injecting radioactive glucose tracers into the bloodstream and then using a device to measure where the activities of radiation is highest, therefore deducing the highest activity in the brain. Next is CT. Computerized tomography is, think of it like an advanced X-ray, okay? This X-ray just comes from all angles and can create a 3D model of the brain, but this one can't see the activities of the brain, so it's just a still picture. It is useful for observing physical injuries to the brain, though. Finally, we have MRI, which is what we're going to be focusing on throughout psychology. We're going to see this a lot. So we will be writing our first paragraph on the MRI, which now stands for magnetic resonance imaging. And as the name suggests, it uses magnets, really strong ones, and a radio waves. If you've ever been in an MRI, you probably know this is what it looks like. It's a big tubule thing that you're kind of put into. It's very loud when it starts to work. So this is an MRI. Okay. So an MRI is very useful for investigating injuries to the brain. For example, I had a stroke and they wanted to know how the stroke exactly affected me. So they placed me in an MRI, which would then see the activity in my brain while performing tasks. Actually, there's like a special term for this. It's called an fMRI. fMRI. Now you can see this one is lowercase and this is still capital. So this stands for functional. A functional MRI is when you are asked to perform a task while you're inside the machine. So they can see like your brain reacting in real time and you can see everything that's going on while you're doing the action. Okay, it's very useful for like determining what aspects of the brain is responsible for which kind of activity, which you will be learning more about in localization in a further video, so wait for that. Okay, so how does an MRI work? Okay, it works by measuring the hydrogen nuclei in our brain. Hydrogen nuclei is just basically a chemical. Like, I'm not the best at chemistry, but if you do know, you know. This directly measures the oxygen intake of the brain. So as you may know from biology, cell respiration needs oxygen to produce ATP, which in turn fuels the cell and activities of the brain. So if you take a look at the brain here, the most active areas will be consuming the most oxygen. So say I was thinking really hard about like a math problem, okay? So say I've bruised the frontal lobe here. So the oxygen would travel, and most of it would be directed to my active area here, okay? But say I was closing my eyes, I was relaxing, my eyes were closed, less oxygen would be observed here than it would be here. So that's how we successfully see what's happening in the MRI and what's going on with our brain in response to our actions. Okay, so an MRI, realistically, it is also very useful to observe the white matter and the gray matter present in the brain. More specifically, the gray matter. The gray matter they're both neurons, but there's one big difference. So we can see here that there's a myelin sheath, okay? There's myelin sheath, so the whole thing is myelinated. But gray matter, it doesn't have this thing, okay? It is good for using gray matter because although it only takes up 40% of our brain space, it uses 95% of the oxygen. So as you can see, when we measure oxygen, we're going to see the gray matter, right? Whilst the 5% of oxygen used by the white matter would not be as significant to measure. So there is a different method to measure like gray matter in the brain, but that will not be expanded on in this video or maybe throughout this course because it is not very relevant. So don't worry about that. Okay, so using this hydrogen nuclei, it can identify 3 types of different tissue present in the brain, and this produces a high resolution model 3D model of your brain, okay? So it's like a PET and a CT combined. It can see the 3D model of your brain and it can see the activity. So it is just very used in this psychology course. It's very useful in studies, and you can see why. Sorry, my cat is kind of crazy today. Okay, now let's move on. Okay, so as you already know, this is basically MRI in a nutshell, and let's move on to how to write an SAQ surrounding this question. Okay, so explain one technique used to study the brain in relationship to behavior with reference to one study. Now, you may know already how to write an SAQ. If you don't, please let us know and we'll make a video about how exactly to write one. So, our paragraph 1 is of course focused towards this, the theory or idea. Oh, I almost forgot. So, we also want to reference neuroplasticity, okay? Neuroplasticity and MRI. So MRI is also very useful to observe neuroplasticity because, as we've mentioned, it can measure the gray matter. Well, not measure, but observe the gray matter in the brain. And if you didn't know already, neuroplasticity is like the brain's ability to change to stimulus and adapt. But if you don't worry, because this will be covered in another video. This will be covered in another video. Sorry, my mic just cut out a tiny bit. Okay, now let's move on to the SAQ. So, as we've mentioned before, the paragraph 1 is the theory, right? Theory, so we explain MRI here. MRI, we deep delve here. Deep, okay? Deep. Everything I've just said here, included, okay? Paragraph 2 is a study. So for this, I prefer to use a Dragansky study because it is in the biological field, and it is also using an MRI. But if your teacher or your school uses another study, please feel free to do so. This is just what we use in our school. Okay, paragraph 3 is basically linking the theory and the study together, okay? So you're trying to say, how does my theory show my study? How does my study show my theory? I'm just basically combining as many aspects of the two into this one paragraph. Also remember to, in your study, reference as much as you can to MRI. So actually really show how MRI is used in there so the examiners really know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? Okay, now let's take a look at an example SAQ I've written here. It's not the best, I am aware, but it is just an example for you. Okay, so let's see. So first, I'm introducing MRI. So one technique used to study the brain is MRI, aka magnetic resonance imaging. And I'm talking about how it's used. So it uses magnets and radio waves to detect energy pulses from hydrogen nuclei. You can use some scientific fancy language, but you don't have to. You just have to kind of know how it works. And don't worry if you can't remember all this detail for the exam. Just try as hard as you can and do your best. And then the energy data from this can be taken to identify 3 types of tissue, thus being able to produce a 3D model of the brain. So here I'm explaining what does it show us? So it shows a 3D model of the brain, high resolution, very good. The MRI can be used to measure the levels of oxygen intake in the brain to identify the most active areas. So here I'm showing how the lab researchers will be able to observe things through an MRI. And then I'm introducing fMRIs. So I'm not actually mentioning the name, but it is very nice to include it in there because fMRIs are used throughout psychology. Patients are sometimes asked to perform tasks while in an MRI to observe localization. It can be used after injury, brain bleed, or tumors. See how I'm skimping over injury? So you don't want to focus too much on this because it's not quite relevant to the study, and but it is still quite useful information to have there in general. Okay, now I'm just introducing neuroplasticity because it is quite a relevant topic in this study and throughout this biology topic. So I'm just saying, that brain neuroplasticity is the idea that brain is constantly changing and adapting to demands, and I'm just kind of like little brackets here what it is in a nutshell. And now number 2, paragraph number 2 is just basically a study, okay? If you do want to know more about the study, we will be coming up with a video for the study, and we'll explain it more. Okay, sorry, my cat is vocal. Okay, now you can take a quick look at this paragraph 2, and let's move on to paragraph 3. So first, I'm going to start with the conclusion of the study. Okay, sorry guys, my cat's really vocal today. Don't know if you can hear him on this, but we start with the conclusion. We start with the conclusion here. So it is able to grow, adapt, and perform structural changes in response to environmental demands, yada yada. And then now I'm talking about why an MRI is used, or like how does this MRI benefit this experiment. Okay, so I'm saying one benefit in using MRIs in this experiment is that it was able to provide scientific data. It allows them to have evidence that the brain had changed. One reason for using it is because it allows for an accurate model of the brain to be displayed and can show exactly where the structural change has occurred. And it is also very good at investigating gray matter, which is what they were measuring. So bring in as much knowledge from paragraph 1 and paragraph 2 and really combine them together to make sense of the study and make sense of the purpose of the study and why they use an MRI here. And yeah, which is okay, which is pretty easy. But anyways, I hope you enjoy this video, and I hope you know more about MRIs now and techniques to investigating the brain. Please, if you enjoy this, support us on Instagram with Project45IB and like this video. We hope to see you next time, and if you do have any questions or concerns or requests, please do tell us. So thank you for listening and thank you for watching. Bye!